My name is Sophia Carter. I'm 31 years old, and I work as a nurse at St. Matthew's Hospital. Last year, I learned the hard way that even the most stable ground can crack. It started in the middle of a lunch break at the hospital, when I opened Instagram and saw something that shattered me: photos from my best friend Amanda's bachelorette weekend. In the Maldives. A trip I hadn't even known was happening. The first photo had stopped me cold. Amanda, my best friend since childhood, grinning on a stretch of white sand in the Maldives, a flower crown tilted on her head, a glass of champagne raised high. The caption underneath read, "Bachelorette weekend begins." At first, I thought maybe it was some kind of staged photo shoot. Amanda had always loved glamorous backdrops, but this looked like something out of a luxury travel magazine. Then I swiped again. More photos appeared, her surrounded by women in coordinated white swimsuits, perched on the deck of an overwater villa, their sunglasses and smiles gleaming in perfect sync. It hit me then, sharp and undeniable. Not only had I not been invited to this bachelorette trip, but I hadn't even known it was happening. No text. No casual mention. Nothing. And the realization settled like a stone in my chest: if I hadn't been invited here, what about the wedding? My eyes flicked back to her profile, scrolling frantically, searching for any sign. Engagement photos, fittings, bridal showers with people I didn't know, one glittering event after another, but never a tag with my name, never an invitation in my mailbox. I scrolled until my thumb cramped, and still there was nothing. I set my phone face down on the table, heart pounding. I deal with trauma patients every day, watch families get the worst news of their lives, and yet here I was on the verge of breaking down over Instagram. But it wasn't just the trip. It was what it meant. Amanda wasn't simply busy. She hadn't just overlooked me. She had deliberately erased me from one of the most important events of her life. The memory of how it all began came rushing back, uninvited. I could still see her as that nervous little girl on the first day of elementary school, clutching a new backpack and sliding into the bus seat with uncertainty written across her face. I had been shy too, but I sat beside her anyway. By the time we reached school, we were laughing like we had known each other forever. That was us, Amanda the star, always chasing something bigger, and me, the steady anchor she leaned on whenever her world spun too fast. For 20 years I had been there. I held her hand through middle school crushes, stayed up late talking her through college heartbreaks, proofread essays she barely finished on time, patched her up after hangovers, reminded her she was enough when her confidence cracked. I was always the reliable one, the caretaker. And she was dazzling enough that I never minded. Stars need gravity, I used to tell myself. That was my role. But scrolling through her feed now, I realized stars can also burn too brightly to notice the ones who keep them in orbit. Another notification lit up my phone, a boomerang of champagne glasses clinking, tagged #BrideSquadForever. I stared at the caption, bile rising in my throat. Bride Squad. The words I thought would always include me. The women in the picture were strangers with glossy hair and curated smiles. Influencers, socialites, names I barely recognized. Somewhere along the line, Amanda had traded me in for them. The cafeteria clatter seemed to fade as my chest ached. This wasn't just about missing a party. It wasn't even about the wedding. It was about 20 years of memories suddenly rewritten, as if I had never mattered. I used to imagine us standing at each other's milestones, maid of honor dresses, speeches filled with inside jokes, late night dancing to the songs we grew up on. Now Amanda was living that dream, and I wasn't even invited to watch from the back row. I shoved my tray away, appetite long gone, and grabbed my phone before anyone could see the tears threatening to spill. I had learned how to keep a calm, professional mask in front of patients' families. I wasn't about to fall apart in front of coworkers over something that felt so petty. But deep down, I knew this wasn't petty. Some betrayals are loud, with shouting and slammed doors. Others are silent, delivered through absence, through exclusion, through the gaping hole where an invitation should have been. This was the latter. Amanda hadn't forgotten me. She had chosen to leave me out. And the worst part? I didn't even know why. After seeing those Maldives photos, I couldn't stop my mind from wandering backward, as if trying to find the exact place where Amanda and I had begun to drift apart. Memory is tricky like that. It stitches together flashes of childhood and adolescence in a patchwork quilt, but certain moments shine brighter somehow, etched deep enough that even decades later they feel close enough to touch. I could still picture the way Amanda used to come bounding down my driveway after school, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders, her grin as wide as the horizon. She was always full of big ideas, impossible schemes, and wild dreams, and more often than not, I was the one making sure they didn't end in disaster. If she wanted to build a treehouse from half-rotten boards scavenged from the neighbor's trash pile, I was the one who remembered the hammer and warned her to test each branch before climbing. When she got her first crush on a boy from math class and decided she was going to serenade him outside his house with a karaoke machine, I was the one who convinced her to scale it back to a note slipped into his locker. She was the spark, I was the fire extinguisher, and somehow it worked. In high school, that dynamic only grew stronger. Amanda was radiant in the way some people just are, as though life itself bent to make room for their energy. She floated between cliques with effortless charm. The cheerleaders loved her, the theater kids adored her, even the jocks who rarely acknowledged anyone outside their circle made room for her at the lunch table. And me? I was the one she always circled back to. I was steady, predictable, maybe a little boring compared to her orbit of admirers, but I was the one who really knew her. The real Amanda wasn't always as confident as she seemed. She had nights when she called me crying over pimples, grades, or her parents' fights, nights when she confessed she felt like everyone's attention was a performance she had to keep up. With me, she could let that mask slip, and I never minded being the safe place she came home to. College brought our first real test. We went to different schools, me to a state university where I studied nursing, her to a private liberal arts college where she dabbled in everything from theater to communications without ever settling on a major. I remember worrying that distance would fray our bond, but instead, it forced us to prove it. We called each other almost daily, sometimes talking until dawn, sometimes just sitting in silence with our laptops open while we studied. I visited her campus once during sophomore year, and she dragged me to a fraternity party where I stuck out like a sore thumb in my thrift store jeans. But even in a room full of people who adored her, she made me feel like I mattered. Looking back now, I wonder if I mistook her attention for permanence. I assumed our friendship was unshakable because it had already survived so much: awkward phases, long distance, breakups, failures, and wins. I thought that kind of history meant we were untouchable. But there were hints I ignored. Amanda always loved being adored, and while I grounded her, I didn't dazzle her the way others did. When she got a summer internship in New York after junior year, she came back talking about parties on rooftops, meeting actors and artists, brushing shoulders with the kind of people who lived lives we only ever saw on magazine covers. I listened, fascinated, but also uneasy. There was a hunger in her eyes when she described those nights, a hunger for attention and glamour that no amount of midnight phone calls or childhood loyalty could satisfy. Still, I clung to the image of us as inseparable. I reminded myself of the time she stayed up with me through the night when my grandmother passed away, talking me through every wave of grief until I fell asleep with the phone still pressed to my ear. Or the time she showed up unannounced on my dorm doorstep when I failed a major exam, armed with cheap wine and takeout, refusing to let me wallow. She had been my anchor too, in her own way, and I thought that balance would always hold. When we graduated, I slipped seamlessly into my role as a nurse at the local hospital, while Amanda drifted through a string of jobs that seemed more about aesthetics than paychecks: event planning, fashion PR, social media marketing. She always had an instinct for presentation, for curating her life like a story worth watching. I used to tease her that she was her own reality show, and she laughed because she liked the sound of that. Through it all, though, I believed I was still her person. The one constant, the one who knew her not as a star but as Amanda, the girl who once sang badly into a hairbrush in my bedroom and painted constellations on our fort's ceiling with glow-in-the-dark paint. That's why it cut so deeply, seeing those Maldives photos on my lunch break. Because the distance between us hadn't started there, but it was the first time I couldn't deny it anymore. Somewhere between childhood bus rides and college dorm calls, between whispered secrets and drunken karaoke nights, the thread had frayed. And while I was still clutching it tightly, Amanda had let go without warning. I stared at the empty tray in front of me, my appetite gone, and wondered if maybe I had mistaken loyalty for reciprocity. I had poured so much of myself into being the one who stayed, the one who caught her when she fell. But maybe I was just a chapter she had already closed, a part of her story that didn't fit the glossy life she was writing now. The truth lodged in my chest, heavy and painful. Maybe Amanda didn't need me anymore. The first time Amanda told me about Ethan, her voice carried a kind of excitement I hadn't heard before. It was late in the evening, and I had just finished a 12-hour shift. My body ached from standing on my feet all day, my mind still buzzing with monitors and patients, but when her name lit up my phone, I answered immediately. She didn't even say hello, just launched into a breathless story about a charity gala in the city, how she had been invited at the last minute through a work contact, and how she had met him. Ethan Moore, she said, drawing out the syllables as if they carried some hidden power. Carmen, he knew everyone there. Politicians, designers, celebrities, like actual celebrities, and he chose to spend the whole night talking to me. I tried to keep my voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing on me. So, who is he exactly? She laughed in a way that told me she was already charmed. He's in tech, but not in the boring coding kind of way. He invests, he builds, he runs these startups people haven't even heard of yet but probably will in a year. He's magnetic, Carmen. When he talks, everyone listens. And he listens to me. I wanted to be happy for her, I really did, but something about the way she said it unsettled me. Amanda was used to attention. She had been dazzling people since middle school. Yet there was something different in her tone, something almost reverent. I brushed off my unease, telling myself I was just tired. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind for her. Suddenly Amanda was jetting off to weekends in Napa or Hampton's beach houses, posting photos of candlelit dinners and rooftop parties with people whose names carried more weight than I could fathom. I tried to keep up when we spoke, but it was clear I couldn't always follow the references. She dropped phrases like seed funding and Series B investors, words that meant nothing in my world of 4 drips and vitals charts. She didn't mean to make me feel out of place, I don't think she even noticed, but slowly, there was a shift. Our conversations became less about us and more about the circles she was trying to break into. When Amanda finally introduced me to Ethan, it was at a birthday dinner she threw for herself at a high-end restaurant downtown. I still remember the knot in my stomach as I walked in, clutching the most expensive gift I could justify buying, a bottle of wine I'd researched for days so I wouldn't look out of place. The room glittered with designer clothes and polished laughter. I spotted Amanda instantly, radiant in a dress that shimmered under the lights, and at her side was Ethan. He was handsome in that polished, deliberate way, perfectly tailored suit, watch that probably cost more than my car, smile sharp enough to cut glass. When Amanda introduced me as her best friend since elementary school, his handshake was firm, his gaze assessing, as though he was trying to place me in some mental ledger of worth. "A nurse, right?" he asked after Amanda explained what I did. "Yes, 3rd shift at the hospital," I replied, trying to sound confident. "Admirable," he said with a polite smile, but his tone carried the same weight people used when complimenting charity work. Admirable but not impressive. Functional but not remarkable. Before I could think of a response, someone else called his name, and he turned away with effortless ease, already engaged in another conversation. Amanda, of course, didn't notice. She was too busy floating through the room, laughing with friends of friends, introducing me when convenient, leaving me adrift when she got pulled elsewhere. I tried to swallow the bitterness rising in my chest. This was her world now, sleek, fast, dazzling. I told myself I could handle being the ordinary one, as long as she still wanted me there. After that night, though, I began to notice subtle changes in her. Her wardrobe shifted entirely to designer labels, even for casual lunches. Her speech picked up a certain cadence, a careful boredom that seemed rehearsed. Even her laugh, once wild and unrestrained, became softer, more measured, as though she was performing for an invisible audience. She was still Amanda, but it was Amanda filtered, polished for Ethan's world. I tried not to judge. People evolve, I told myself. Maybe this was just growth. But sometimes, when she visited me back home, I'd catch flashes of the old Amanda. Like the night she stayed over before her father's 60th birthday. We sat on my couch with a bottle of wine, and she curled into an old college sweatshirt, her makeup washed away. She admitted in a whisper that sometimes she felt like she was always auditioning. Jason's world is exhausting, she confessed, her voice small. Everyone is always evaluating you, measuring if you belong. It never ends. Then why stay in it? I asked carefully. The Amanda I know never cared what people thought. She gave me a sad smile. That Amanda didn't know what she was missing. Once you've seen what's possible, it's hard to go back. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her that ordinary wasn't a prison, it was freedom, authenticity, the kind of life where you didn't have to pretend. But I bit my tongue, afraid of pushing her further away. She squeezed my hand then, her eyes searching mine. You're the only one who still sees the real me, she whispered. Promise me we'll always be friends, no matter what. I promised, because that's what I'd always done. And when she said, with absolute certainty, when Ethan and I get married, you'll be right there with me, I believed her. But belief doesn't protect you from betrayal. And promises, I would learn, don't always survive the weight of someone else's ambition. At first, when Amanda got engaged to Ethan, I convinced myself nothing between us would really change. Sure, she was moving in a different world now, but I believed there was still space for me, the same way there had always been. When she asked me to be her maid of honor, I cried with relief. The title felt like proof that, no matter how many designers or investors she surrounded herself with, our 20 years of friendship mattered more. For weeks afterward, I threw myself into the role. I bought wedding magazines, started spreadsheets, made lists of ideas for bachelorette weekends and bridal showers. I told myself this was our chance to return to the closeness we'd always shared. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, that closeness began to slip through my fingers. At first it was small things. She'd cancel one of our planning brunches because she had fittings with a designer. Then it was a call cut short because she had to jump on a flight with Ethan to Miami. When she did show up, her phone buzzed constantly, her eyes flicking toward the screen even as I tried to tell her about my day. She wasn't unkind exactly, but I started to feel like background noise, the familiar melody she no longer noticed while chasing new rhythms. The group texts became harder too. At first, I was added to the bridal party chat, but the messages came in such a flood that I could barely keep up. Amanda's new circle, women with glossy hair and curated feeds, spoke in a shorthand I didn't understand, full of inside jokes about parties I hadn't been at and people I had never met. I tried to contribute, but my comments were often ignored, swept aside by talk of couture gowns and luxury spas. I would reread the threads late at night, wondering if anyone even noticed I was there. When the bridesmaid dress selection finally came through, I nearly choked when I saw the price tag. $3,000 for a dress that I would wear once, if that. I told myself it was a once-in-a-lifetime moment, that I would find a way to afford it, even if it meant draining my savings. I swallowed the discomfort, too embarrassed to admit how heavy the cost felt compared to my modest salary. That was the first time I realized how different our worlds had become, not just in lifestyle, but in expectations. What hurt more than the money, though, were the subtle jabs I couldn't ignore. At one brunch, one of Amanda's new friends leaned across the table and said, "So, Sophia, you're a nurse? That must be so noble." I could never deal with, the mess. Her tone carried the same mixture of admiration and disdain I'd once heard from Ethan. Amanda laughed lightly and changed the subject, never noticing the flush that crept into my cheeks. Another time, during a group shopping trip Amanda insisted on, one of the bridesmaids looked at my outfit and said, "You're so brave for wearing flats with that skirt." Brave, as if I had committed some kind of fashion sin. I laughed it off, but inside I felt the old sting of being the ordinary one, the friend who didn't quite measure up. Amanda, lost in her excitement over earrings that cost half my rent, didn't even hear the remark. The moment that truly broke me, though, came in the most unceremonious way. I had been waiting all week for Amanda to confirm our next planning session. When she finally texted, it was short, almost careless. "Hey, some changes with the bridal party, we'll explain later." At first I thought nothing of it, until Danielle, a mutual friend from high school, called me, sounding hesitant. "Did Amanda talk to you?" she asked. "About what?" I said, though a knot had already formed in my stomach. "She added me to the bridal party email list, but your name wasn't on it." I thought maybe there was a mistake. I stared at the phone in silence, my ears ringing. Danielle, who Amanda hadn't spoken to in years, was in. I was out. When I finally confronted Amanda by text, my hands shaking as I typed, she responded hours later with a message so detached it felt like a stranger had written it. "Ethan's mother thinks 8 bridesmaids will look more balanced than 9. You know how these things are. Since you and I have such a strong bond, I knew you'd understand why the others had to stay." Understand. As if 20 years of friendship could be dismissed in the name of symmetry. As if being replaced by women I had only just met was something I could rationalize. For days, I walked around in a haze, my chest heavy with unspoken grief. At work, I smiled for patients and their families, but the moment I got home, I collapsed on my couch and let the tears come. I couldn't even bring myself to tell my parents right away. Saying it out loud felt like it would make it too real, that my best friend, the person I had trusted with every part of me since childhood, had chosen Image over me. And yet, even then, a part of me kept hoping she would come to her senses. That she would call late at night, the way she used to, and apologize, admit she had lost her way. That hope clung to me even as I stared at Instagram posts of Amanda and her new friends trying on gowns, laughing in boutiques, sipping champagne at rooftop bars. Posts I was never tagged in, never even told about. Looking back now, I can see it clearly, this was the slow fade. Not one clean break, not a single fight I could point to as the end. Just the gradual erosion of something I thought was unshakable, worn down by glitter and wealth and a hunger for belonging I could never satisfy. And I, loyal to a fault, kept clinging to threads she had already let slip through her fingers. But the truth was undeniable. Amanda wasn't just drifting. She was letting me go. I don't know why I kept checking the mail. Maybe it was stubborn hope, maybe it was denial, but for weeks after Amanda cut me from the bridal party I kept expecting an envelope to arrive. Some beautifully printed card on heavy cardstock with gold foil letters spelling out my name. Even if I wasn't standing beside her, surely I would still be there to witness the day we had dreamed of since we were little girls. But every day the mailbox yielded nothing but bills, coupons, and hospital newsletters. The truth finally crashed down one evening as I scrolled through social media after another long shift. Photos began popping up on mutual acquaintances' feeds, close-up shots of invitations in elegant calligraphy, videos of wax seals being broken, captions full of excitement about attending Amanda and Ethan's wedding. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in disbelief. Dozens of people I barely knew had invitations in hand. And I had nothing. I tried to convince myself maybe it had been lost in the mail. Maybe she had sent mine late. Maybe there was some mix-up that would all be resolved with a single phone call. I dialed Amanda's number, my hand trembling. The call rang until voicemail. I tried again. And again. By the third attempt, my stomach had already dropped. Minutes later a text appeared, "In final venue walkthrough, can I call tomorrow?" I didn't want to wait until tomorrow. My fingers flew across the screen, just checking, has my invitation been sent? The typing bubbles appeared. Disappeared. Reappeared. The second stretched into what felt like hours before her reply finally came. "This is awkward, but we had to make some difficult decisions about the guest list. The venue has strict capacity limits, and Ethan's family had more essential invitees than anticipated." I read the words again and again, unable to process them. Guest list cuts. Capacity limits. Essential invitees. It sounded clinical, detached, like I was some casual acquaintance trimmed away for convenience, not her best friend of 2 decades. I typed back furiously, my vision blurring with tears, but I see posts about new people being added. Her response was swift this time, as though she had anticipated my protest. Those are business connections of Ethan's father. Very important for the family. And then came the final blow, the sentence that hollowed me out completely: you wouldn't really fit in with the crowd anyway. The social dynamics would be uncomfortable for you. I'm trying to spare you that awkwardness. I dropped the phone as though it had burned me. For a long moment I just sat on my couch, staring into the darkness of my apartment, my chest aching with something deeper than anger. It was humiliation, betrayal, grief all tangled together. She hadn't just excluded me. She had decided I wasn't good enough to stand among her guests, as if 20 years of shared history meant less than the impression I might make on a roomful of strangers. That night I cried harder than I had in years. The kind of tears that rack your body, that leave your throat raw and your eyes swollen. I buried my face in my pillow and thought of all the times Amanda had leaned on me, all the nights I had held her while she cried, all the moments I had put her needs ahead of mine because I believed that's what best friends did. And now, when it mattered most, I had been discarded like an accessory that no longer matched her outfit. I called my sister, Alicia, barely coherent as I explained between sobs. She gasped when I told her. After you spent $3,000 on a bridesmaid dress you'll never even wear? That's beyond unacceptable. We were like sisters, I whispered. 20 years. And she didn't even think I deserved a seat. Alicia's anger burned hotter than mine. We should crash the wedding. I'll wear white and bring a date with a criminal record. That'll show her. The image made me laugh weakly through my tears, though the ache in my chest didn't lessen. My parents were no less horrified when I told them at Sunday dinner. My usually even-tempered father swore under his breath when I showed him Amanda's final text. That is not a friend, my mother declared, refilling my glass of wine. That is someone who has forgotten who she is and where she came from. Their support steadied me, but when I returned to my apartment alone, the emptiness came rushing back. I made the mistake of opening Instagram before bed and was hit with a wave of new photos from Amanda's Parisian bachelorette weekend, matching swimsuits, champagne in front of the Eiffel Tower, captions dripping with glamour. I stared at the screen until the tears blurred my vision. The question looped endlessly in my head: was I not enough? Not pretty enough, not successful enough, not shiny enough to keep my place in her life? The following weeks passed in a blur. I showed up to work each day, plastered on smiles for my patients, but the moment I walked through my apartment door the facade cracked. My eating habits spiraled between extremes. Sometimes I had no appetite at all, sometimes I devoured entire pints of ice cream in one sitting. Dark circles grew under my eyes from restless nights spent replaying every memory with Amanda, searching for clues about how it had come to this. One afternoon, my supervisor called me into her office. She was kind, but her eyes held concern. "Sophia, you haven't seemed yourself lately. Is everything okay?" That simple question broke the dam. To my horror, I burst into tears, stammering out the story of Amanda and the wedding between ragged breaths. She listened quietly, offering tissues until I calmed. When I was finished, she studied me for a long moment and said gently, "You haven't taken a single vacation day all year. Maybe this is the universe telling you to take time for yourself." Take time and do what? I asked miserably. Sit at home scrolling through more wedding updates? No, she said firmly. Go somewhere. Anywhere. Preferably somewhere without Wi-Fi. Reconnect with yourself. Her words clung to me long after I left her office. That night, unable to sleep, I found myself scrolling through travel websites instead of social media. Paris was out of the question, it was Amanda's playground now. Rome felt too romantic for a solo traveler nursing a broken heart. I was about to close my laptop when an advertisement flashed across the screen: Mountain Art Retreat, Montana. Disconnect to reconnect. The photos were simple but beautiful: cabins nestled among pines, easels set up in studios overlooking valleys, people hiking under wide open skies. Something in me stirred. When was the last time I had painted? Not since high school, when Amanda and I used to cover our bedroom walls with messy murals. The thought of picking up a brush again after all these years made something deep inside me ache with longing. At 2 in the morning, my eyes swollen from crying, I clicked, book now. 7 days in Montana, leaving the day before Amanda's wedding. It drained nearly all of my savings, but as the confirmation email landed in my inbox, I felt the first flicker of excitement I had known in months. For once, I wasn't centering my life around Amanda's choices. For once, I was choosing me. The morning of my departure arrived with a strange mix of dread and relief. I packed my suitcase in silence, folding clothes with mechanical precision, trying not to think about the fact that Amanda's wedding was only a day away. As I zipped the bag shut, my eyes landed on a framed photo on my dresser, Amanda and me at our high school graduation, arms thrown around each other, faces shining with unfiltered joy. For a long moment I stood frozen, staring at the girls we had been. Then, with a shaky breath, I laid the frame face down. At the airport, the buzz of travelers felt both overwhelming and liberating. I texted my family the flight information, adding a final note before boarding, going on airplane mode now. We'll check in when I arrive. Love you all. The moment I toggled the setting and saw the bars disappear, an odd lightness settled over me. No Instagram updates, no texts from people reminding me what I wasn't part of, no chance of sending a message I would regret. Just me and the unknown waiting on the other side. The flight was long, but the drive from the small Montana airport to the retreat was where the transformation began. My driver, a kind man named Manuel, pointed out wildlife along the road, elk grazing on a hillside, hawks circling above the plains. As we climbed into the mountains, the air thinned and brightened, pine trees stretching toward a sky so vast it made my chest expand in spite of myself. By the time we pulled into the gravel drive of the retreat, the sun was beginning to dip low, spilling gold over the peaks. The retreat itself was nothing like the glossy photos from Amanda's world. No chandeliers, no velvet drapes. Just a cluster of wooden cabins tucked among evergreens, connected by stone pathways lined with lanterns. The main lodge was open and airy, beams of polished wood supporting high ceilings, the scent of pine and firewood wrapping around me like a blanket. Welcome to Ridgeview, said Lucia, the retreat manager, as she handed me a mug of steaming herbal tea. Her eyes were warm, her presence steady. Your journey was good? Yes, I said softly, though what I really wanted to admit was that I already felt different here, as if I had shed something heavy at the airport. You look tired, she observed, her gaze kind but penetrating. Not just from travel. From here. She touched her chest over her heart. Something in me cracked at that. I nodded, unable to trust my voice as tears pricked at my eyes. It is okay, she said. Many arrive carrying burdens. The mountains have a way of showing us what we no longer need to carry. She walked me to my cabin, the farthest from the main lodge, perched on a small ridge that overlooked a valley. This is our most private space, she explained. Good for reflection. Inside, the cabin was simple but beautiful, a bed draped with a quilt, an old wooden desk, floor-to-ceiling windows opening onto a deck with a hammock that swayed gently in the evening breeze. The bathroom had an indoor-outdoor shower framed by smooth stones and ferns, the kind of place where you felt part of the forest even while standing under hot water. After unpacking, I sat in the hammock as the sun melted into the horizon, the sounds of the forest surrounding me, rustling leaves, the occasional call of an owl. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I let myself cry without restraint. Not the quiet tears I shed after work, not the choked sobs into my pillow, but deep, guttural sobs that racked my whole body. I cried for the friendship I had lost, for the humiliation of Amanda's rejection, for the little girl inside me who still wanted to believe loyalty was enough. I cried until exhaustion pulled me into sleep, the stars sharp above me. When I woke the next morning, light poured through the windows, painting the wooden floor in golden patterns. My body ached from sleeping in the hammock, but my chest felt a little lighter, as though the tears had rinsed something away. Remembering Lucia's suggestion, I made my way to the yoga platform at 7. The instructor, a silver-haired woman named Elena, greeted me with a serene smile. We begin with intention, she said once everyone had rolled out their mats. Close your eyes. Ask yourself, what do you wish to release? What do you wish to welcome in? I closed my eyes and instantly saw Amanda's face. Memories flickered behind my lids, bus rides, sleepovers, graduation caps, then the texts that cut me out. My throat tightened. Elena's voice guided me to breathe into the discomfort, to imagine the pain dissolving with every exhale. For the first time, I allowed myself to picture a life not defined by Amanda, a self not measured against her approval. After yoga, I joined other guests for breakfast on the terrace overlooking the valley. The food was simple, fresh fruit, homemade bread, strong coffee, but it tasted like a feast. A couple named Margaret and Robert introduced themselves, older travelers celebrating their 40th anniversary. Margaret studied me for a moment before saying gently, "Forgive me, but you have the look of someone nursing a broken heart." Normally I would have deflected, but something about this place loosened my guard. Not romantic, I admitted. A friendship. My best friend decided I wasn't good enough for her wedding. Robert shook his head. "That's not a friend," he said firmly. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Want to know the secret to lasting relationships of any kind? Choosing each other, again and again, even when it's hard. If someone stops choosing you the moment something shinier comes along, they were never truly choosing you at all." Her words echoed in my mind for the rest of the day. Later, on a guided hike to a nearby waterfall, our group scattered across rocks and pools. Sophia, our guide, sat beside me and shared her own story of betrayal, her best friend who had stolen her boyfriend. "The anger poisoned me," she said, skimming her fingers across the water. "Until I realized forgiveness was not for her, but for me. She was living her life, while I was stuck. You understand?" I nodded slowly, realizing that's exactly what I had been doing, staying stuck in Amanda's rejection, letting it define my worth. That night, as I lay on the hammock again under a sky bursting with stars, I realized I hadn't checked my phone all day. It sat buried at the bottom of my bag, still on airplane mode, as though it belonged to another life. The silence felt liberating. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't measuring myself against Amanda's curated feed. For the first time in years, maybe, I was just me. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The days at Ridgeview slipped into a rhythm that felt almost otherworldly, as though time stretched differently in the mountains. Each morning began with yoga, the slow movements coaxing the stiffness from my body and the heaviness from my mind. Afterward, we gathered in the studio, a space with wide windows that opened to endless views of pine-covered ridges, where easels stood waiting with blank canvases. At first I hovered uncertainly, staring at the brushes and paints like they were relics from another life. It had been so long since I had painted that I was terrified of what would come out of me if I tried. But when I finally dipped a brush into blue paint and dragged it across the canvas, something inside me exhaled. The first strokes were clumsy, uneven, but I kept going, letting the color spill across the surface in waves and shadows. I didn't try to create anything specific, just movement, just emotion. Hours passed without me noticing, until my shoulders ached and my fingers were stained with streaks of color. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't thinking about Amanda. I wasn't thinking about who I wasn't or what I had lost. I was simply here, creating something that belonged entirely to me. In the afternoons, I joined hikes through the surrounding wilderness. It was on one of these treks that I got to know Mason, the retreat's wilderness guide. He was quiet at first, with a calm presence that matched the mountains themselves, but as we walked side by side along a trail that wound through golden meadows, I found myself talking more than I expected. I told him about my work at the hospital, about the patients who haunted me, about the exhaustion that came from always being the one who held everything together. He listened without interruption, occasionally glancing at me with eyes that seemed to catch the light in unexpected ways. "And your friend?" he asked gently, after I paused. The word friend caught in my throat. She was my best friend. We met when we were kids. For years I thought nothing could break us. Then she found this new world. Wealth, status, people who cared more about image than substance. and suddenly I wasn't enough to keep around. We stopped by a stream, the water rushing over smooth stones. Mason crouched to dip his hand in, watching the current swirl around his fingers. Sometimes, he said slowly, we hold on to people out of habit. We think loyalty means never letting go. But maybe real loyalty is also knowing when to release them, so we can hold on to ourselves. His words sank deep, stirring something I had been afraid to admit. I had built my identity around being Amanda's anchor. Without her, I wasn't sure who I was. But maybe I had it backward. Maybe I had been so busy holding her steady that I never stopped to steady myself. That evening, after dinner by the lodge fireplace, I stayed behind while most guests drifted off. Mason lingered too, leaning against the stone hearth, his presence both grounding and unsettling. He asked if I had ever painted before, and I confessed how much I had loved it as a child, how Amanda and I used to cover my bedroom walls with murals until my parents begged us to stop. You should keep painting, he said. Not because it's productive or impressive, but because it makes you feel alive. That's reason enough. Later, in my cabin, I opened my journal for the first time in years. The words spilled out, memories of Amanda, flashes of grief, but also sparks of joy from the retreat. I ended with 3 things I was grateful for: the sky streaked pink at sunset, the laughter at dinner when Robert told a story about their anniversary gone wrong, and the way painting had made me lose track of time. It was a small practice, but it felt like planting seeds. Each day added to the transformation. My body grew stronger on the hikes, my hands steadier with the brush. I laughed easily with Margaret and Robert, who began to feel like surrogate grandparents, their gentle encouragement filling a space I hadn't realized was empty. And Mason, though we spoke only in fragments, challenged me in ways that startled me. He didn't flatter, didn't placate, didn't treat me like someone who needed to be handled carefully. Instead, he looked at me as if I already had the answers, if only I would stop doubting myself long enough to see them. One night, after a long day spent sketching in the valley, I stood on my deck watching the stars flare above the ridges. I thought about Amanda's world, its curated perfection, its glossy images designed for likes and comments, and compared it to this vast, unfiltered sky. Here, nothing needed editing. Here, beauty simply was. For the first time since Amanda's betrayal, I felt something shift inside me. The pain was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. It was becoming part of me, something I could carry without breaking. I realized that I had been waiting for Amanda to validate me, to remind me I was enough. But standing under that endless Montana sky, paint still smudged on my hands, I finally believed I could validate myself. Maybe this was what reclaiming myself looked like, not a dramatic transformation, but a slow return to the parts of me I had abandoned along the way. The girl who loved color. The woman who found peace in silence. The person who could stand on her own, even without Amanda's orbit. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of who I might become without her. By the time the week of the wedding arrived, I had nearly forgotten what day it was supposed to happen. At Ridgeview, my life had shrunk to simple rituals: morning yoga, afternoons painting, evenings under the stars. The outside world felt distant, muted, almost irrelevant. I told myself that while Amanda was stepping into her glittering new life, I was stepping into my own, though far humbler, reborn in paint and pine needles. Still, I couldn't keep the thought entirely at bay. On the morning I knew she was walking down the aisle, I woke with a strange heaviness. I tried to shake it off with a hike, but as I stood on a ridge staring out at snow-dusted peaks, I couldn't help imagining her in some designer gown, surrounded by hundreds of guests, Ethan at her side, his mother orchestrating every detail like a general in battle. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was better off here. But the ache in my chest told another story. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known as I washed paint off my hands that evening, was that Amanda's perfect day was unraveling in real time. While I was mixing shades of green to capture the valley outside my cabin window, news alerts were breaking across the internet, headlines spilling across finance blogs and social media threads faster than the planners could hide them. Ethan more implicated in cryptocurrency fraud investigation. I didn't learn the details until much later, but I would eventually hear how it played out. Guests arriving in black cars were greeted not by champagne flutes but by frantic whispers. The wedding planner's phone buzzed non-stop as vendors threatened to pull out. Ethan had disappeared into a side room with his father, their voices raised, while Amanda sat in her suite with her bridesmaids, still believing the delay was a minor inconvenience. By the time she learned what was happening, half the guests were already checking their phones, screenshots flying through group chats, disbelief turning to judgment. It would have been chaos under any circumstances, but Amanda's wedding had been designed as a spectacle. 300 guests, a venue dripping in flowers, live music, every detail curated for the kind of photos meant to go viral. Instead, what went viral was the implosion: videos of guests storming out, posts about unpaid vendors refusing to serve food, a makeup artist's assistant whispering about how the bride had locked herself in the bathroom. Later, when I finally returned from Montana and turned my phone back on, I would scroll through message after message, my family begging me to call, friends linking me to the headlines, even Amanda's mother leaving a voicemail saying Amanda was desperate to talk to me. But that day, I was blissfully ignorant. While Amanda's world was collapsing, I was sitting cross-legged on the studio floor, painting the shape of a mountain as the light shifted across its face, feeling more at peace than I had in months. It was only that night, when I dreamed of Amanda, that I sensed something was wrong. In the dream she stood on the edge of a lake in her wedding gown, the fabric spreading around her like a cloud. She stepped into the water, deeper and deeper, until it closed over her head. I called out, but my voice echoed uselessly, and she didn't turn back. I woke with my heart racing, the darkness of the cabin pressing in. The silence was heavy, filled with a foreboding I couldn't shake. When I extended my stay for 3 more days, I told myself it was because I wasn't ready to face reality, to risk opening my phone and seeing photos of a wedding I had been erased from. I had no idea that the photos didn't exist, that what I was avoiding had already self-destructed. In some strange way, fate had protected me. By putting my phone on airplane mode, by retreating into the mountains, I had unknowingly kept myself insulated from the storm, free to heal while Amanda's carefully constructed life was reduced to ashes. I would later wonder if some part of me had sensed it all along, if that dream had been my subconscious warning me that Amanda was drowning in a world she thought she wanted. But in that moment, all I knew was that my silence had given me something I hadn't expected: freedom. For the first time, I realized I wasn't standing on the sidelines of Amanda's story anymore. I was writing my own. When I finally turned my phone back on after leaving Ridgeview, it buzzed so violently I nearly dropped it. Notifications poured in for almost a full minute, dozens of missed calls, endless texts, emails stacked like bricks. At first I panicked, convinced something had happened to my family, but as I scrolled, the truth became clear. It wasn't my family. It was Amanda. The wedding exploded. "Call me," Alicia had written days earlier. My mother's voicemail begged me to reach out. Even Amanda's mother had left a message: "She needs you right now, Sophia. Please call when you can." I listened in stunned silence as message after message painted the picture I had missed. Ethan's scandal had gone public, guests had fled, vendors had walked out, and Amanda had been left humiliated in front of hundreds. My chest tightened with conflicting emotions: shock, pity, and a sharp pang of vindication I was almost ashamed to feel. For months I had imagined her glowing in a gown, radiant in her new world while I hid in the shadows. Instead, her dream had collapsed into a nightmare, and everyone had been trying to reach me while I floated in blissful ignorance under Montana's skies. It was only a matter of days before she appeared. I had barely settled back into my routine, barely unpacked the last of my clothes, when I heard the soft knock on the door of the small art studio I had rented. I froze, brush in hand, paint still wet on the canvas. The knock came again, tentative. When I opened the door, Amanda stood there, almost unrecognizable. Gone were the designer clothes, the flawless makeup, the perfectly styled hair. She wore jeans and a plain sweater, her curls unbrushed, her face pale except for the redness around her eyes. She looked fragile, hollowed out, like someone who had been walking through fire. For a moment neither of us spoke. The weight of 20 years pressed between us. "Can I come in?" she asked finally, her voice hoarse. I stepped aside, though my hands shook. She walked slowly, as though unsure of her welcome, and lowered herself into a chair. Her eyes drifted to the canvases leaning against the wall. "You're painting again," she whispered, as if the sight surprised her. I nodded but said nothing. I wanted her to speak first. When she finally did, her voice cracked. "I don't even know where to start. What I did to you was unforgivable." The words I had longed to hear didn't land the way I expected. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. "Then why did you do it?" I asked quietly. She flinched. "Because I was stupid. Because I wanted so badly to belong to Ethan's world that I let his mother convince me everything about me needed improvement. My clothes, my friends, my background. She never said your name, but she made it clear you didn't fit the image. And I let her voice drown out my own. I told myself it was just temporary, just for the wedding. But in the process I lost the one person who mattered most." I swallowed hard, the ache of her betrayal still raw. "You cut me out completely. Do you have any idea what that felt like? To scroll through photos of a trip I didn't even know was happening, to realize I hadn't been invited to the wedding at all?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. I knew exactly how much it would hurt, and I did it anyway. "I can't take it back, Sophia. But I need you to know, when everything fell apart, the only person I wanted was you. Standing there in that ridiculous gown with cameras flashing and Ethan sneering at me, all I wanted was to hear your voice, to have you tell me what to do like when we were kids. And you weren't there because I'd already pushed you away." Her words twisted something in me. For years, I had been her anchor. Now she was admitting she had still expected me to be, even after cutting me out. "Amanda," I said slowly, "I can't just step back into that role. I can't keep being the person who holds you together while you throw me aside whenever it's convenient." She nodded quickly, desperation in her eyes. "I don't expect that anymore. I miss you. Not the audience, not the maid of honor, not the accessory to my image. You. I don't know who I am without all of this, and I want to figure it out, but I don't want to do it without at least trying to fix what I broke." I thought of the waterfall hike, of Sophia the guide telling me forgiveness wasn't for the betrayer but for the betrayed. I thought of Mason urging me to reclaim the pieces of myself I had abandoned. I looked at Amanda, smaller than I remembered, stripped of her glitter, and I realized I had a choice. "I can't go back to the way things were," I said finally. "Too much has happened. But maybe we can try something new. A different kind of friendship, with boundaries. If this is going to work, it has to be based on respect and truth. I won't be erased again, Amanda." She let out a shaky breath, relief flickering across her face. "That's more than I deserve. But I'll take it. I'll try." As she stood to leave, she paused by one of my canvases, a half-finished mountain scene. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "You always did see the world more clearly than I did." For once, I didn't rush to fill the silence, didn't soften the edges for her. I simply nodded, paintbrush still in my hand, reclaiming the space that was mine. 6 months after Amanda's wedding that never was, I stood in a small gallery downtown, staring at the walls lined with my paintings. My paintings. Landscapes of Montana valleys, abstract bursts of color born out of grief and healing, even one canvas that depicted the tangled knot of blue and black I had felt the night I realized I wasn't invited to Amanda's wedding. People milled around with glasses of cheap wine, murmuring to each other, pausing in front of my work with thoughtful expressions. The sight felt surreal, like watching a version of myself I hadn't believed could exist. It wasn't a glamorous show, no critics, no designers, no glittering guest list. Just a modest community event organized by the retreat director who had encouraged me to keep painting when I came home. But as I stood there, listening to the low hum of appreciation, I felt something far richer than glamour. I felt whole. Amanda arrived late. I saw her reflection in the glass before I saw her in person, her curls loose around her shoulders, her outfit simple but elegant. She had been keeping her distance these past months, respecting the boundaries I'd drawn. We met for coffee occasionally, exchanged messages here and there, but it was different now, slower, more tentative, less like the codependent tangle we'd once lived in. When she approached me that night, her smile was small, almost shy. "Congratulations," she said softly, gesturing to the walls. "This is incredible, Sophia. I'm so proud of you." For a moment I let myself remember the girl I'd once known, the one who painted stars on our bedroom fort, the one who swore we'd stand at each other's weddings. Then I looked at the woman standing in front of me now, humbled, scarred, but trying. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. We walked the gallery together, and she stopped at one piece in particular, a mountain under a sky streaked with wild color. "This one," she whispered, "it feels like freedom." I glanced at her. It was, I admitted. It was the first painting I finished at Ridgeview, the one where I finally let go of needing your approval. She winced slightly but nodded. I needed to hear that. I think part of me always assumed you would wait for me, no matter how badly I treated you. I'm glad you didn't. You deserved more. Her honesty startled me, but it also eased something inside me. For months, I had wrestled with the fear that forgiving her would make me weak, would erase the progress I'd fought for. But standing beside her in that gallery, I realized forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about refusing to let the past chain me down. Later that night, as the crowd thinned and I finally had a chance to breathe, Mason appeared at the door. He had driven hours from Montana to surprise me, his familiar calm presence filling the space like sunlight. He didn't need to say much, just squeezed my hand and looked at the paintings, his eyes warm with quiet pride. I thought of the girl who had boarded a plane months ago, hollowed out by betrayal, her phone buzzing with reminders of what she wasn't invited to. And then I thought of the woman standing here now, surrounded by canvases, by friends who valued her, by a future that was hers to shape. Amanda lingered as the evening wound down. When she hugged me goodbye, it was gentle, not desperate. "Thank you for giving me another chance," she whispered. "I know it will take time. But I'm willing to do the work." I believed her, though I also knew our friendship would never look the same again. And that was okay. It didn't need to. What mattered was that I had found myself in the absence, in the silence, in the wide open spaces of Montana and the colors I poured onto canvas. As I locked the gallery door behind me that night, bracelet from Lucia still tied around my wrist, I felt a strange gratitude for the path I had been forced onto. Amanda's rejection had shattered me, but it had also pushed me into rediscovery. The detour had become the destination. Life rarely unfolds the way we imagine it. Sometimes we lose the people we thought would stand beside us forever. Sometimes rejection becomes the doorway to something unexpected. And sometimes, in the ruins of what we thought we needed, we uncover the truest version of ourselves. As I walked into the cool night air, stars scattered above the city like brushstrokes across a canvas, I whispered a promise to myself: I will never measure my worth by anyone else's invitation again. From now on, I paint my own.